So I'll let you take over.
Yes, good evening. Yes, I think we can start because there are so many of us there already. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Bars Digital event. I'm Gioia Angeletti. I am Associate Professor of English Literature at the University of Parma in Italy, and I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be chairing this panel this evening. 5 speakers will give their contribution, and we'll introduce you to each of them before their talks. Because I am the chair this evening, I guess I need to do a little bit of housekeeping before getting started. So let me remind you of the fact that you've got to mute your microphones and turn your video cameras off, at least until the questions and answers session, which I will open after the 5 presentations. And of course, during the questions and answer session, you are very welcome to switch video and microphone on when you want to ask a question, or at any time, you can write your questions, post your questions in the chat, possibly using the letter Q to indicate the question, so that it will be much easier for us to identify them and then ask them to the speakers. Now, before introducing briefly the topic of this event and the speakers, on behalf of all my colleagues, I want to thank the British Association of Romantic Studies, and particularly the BARS Digital Events Committee, for putting together such an inspiring series of seminars and roundtables, which are particularly appreciated in the difficult times we're all living. Because they really offer such a valid alternative to in-person meetings, which we are unable, unfortunately, to organize. And it's so encouraging to see that so many are participating from actually around the world here this evening, but of course, as in all Buzz Digital events. And this gives really a sense of the community we belong to, and a community willing to share what we do despite the present difficulties. So we are very grateful to BARS for accepting our proposal, for giving us the opportunity to present you with some of the results of an ongoing research project that we have been undertaking for a while, both individually and as a team. The seminar is part actually of the research activities of the Inter-University Center for the Study of Romanticism. Please allow me to spend just a couple of words on this center, since most of you might not be familiar with it. The center, based in the Department of Modern Languages, Literatures and Cultures of the University of Bologna in Italy, was founded in 1993 by Lilla Crisafulli, who is one of our speakers this evening. It involves various Italian universities and collaborates with international research institutions in order to consolidate and to expand a growing network of partnerships, with the common aim of promoting Romantic studies from a fundamentally interdisciplinary perspective. Throughout the years, the members of the center from different disciplinary areas have undertaken new research routes on the study of Romanticism, through the organization of national as well as international conferences, lectures, seminars, artistic, cultural events, all generally leading to collaborative publication projects. And as I have anticipated, the topic we proposed concerns one of the research areas with which a group of scholars who are also members of the center has been recently engaged. And that is the crucial role that Romantic period literature had in raising awareness about environmental issues, ecological processes, and sustainable relationships between mankind and the earth, between human consciousness and nature. An awareness that, needless to say, has become particularly cogent now that the environmental crisis is at the core of global political agendas. Now, we conceived the seminar both as a spin-off of our previous research projects centered mainly on Anglo-Italian intercultural relations, and also as a continuation of a conference we organized in Parma in the pre-COVID era, because that was on the 13th of November 2019. At the time entitled Rooting Eco-Criticism, British Romanticism and the Environment. On that occasion, each of the speakers offered a new contribution to what has become an extremely thriving and sprouting field of study. Well, undoubtedly, we are not dealing here with an uncharted territory, we know, but with a mode of academic inquiry which still presents, we think, unexplored niches that can and should be investigated. Actually, both Ian Duncan's and Fiona Stafford's talks in the first part of the digital event called attention on some new avenues along which critical discourses of environment, nature, geography, and material production in Romantic studies have developed and will continue developing. And in some ways, today's event is grafted, I think, onto some of the considerations that emerged in their papers. It was 1977 when Donald Worcester published Nature's Economy, a key history of ecological thought. And there he wrote, I'm going to quote, at the very core of the Romantic view of nature was what later generations would come to call an ecological perspective. That is a search for holistic or integrated perception, an emphasis on interdependence and relatedness in nature, and an intense desire to restore man to a place of intimate intercourse with the vast organism that constitutes the earth, end quote. And since then, actually mainly from the 1990s, we've witnessed the publication of numerous monographs and special journal issues of, for instance, the Wordsworth Circle and Studies in Romanticism, all devoted to romantic eco-criticism, romantic ecology, green romanticism, or to use a rather awkward coinage, environromanticism. And a whole range of contributions appeared between Jonathan Bates' groundbreaking Romantic Ecology, dated 1991, and Kate Rigby's recent study entitled Reclaiming Romanticism Towards an Ecopoetics of Decolonization, which was published last year. Considerable work in the field has been done, among others by Carl Kreber, Greg Garrard, Timothy Morton, and Ashton Nichols. And also the website Romantic Circles provides various invaluable resources to explore the field. So the ground is extremely fertile. It is continuously burgeoning. And for this past seminar, we have chosen a particular approach, which is summarized by its title, Geo and Eco-Criticism, Returning to Romantic Italy. Considering how Romantic period engagements with ecosystems are inextricably bound up with notions of geopolitics and geoculture, the theoretical frame of the seminar derives from an intersection of the methods and approaches of geocriticism and eco-criticism. After all, the bifurcation of nature and culture has been questioned by recent scholars of eco-criticism in favor of their mutual embeddedness. For instance, in one of our contributions to the field, Kate Rigby has stated that, I quote, eco-criticism remembers the earth by rendering an account of the indebtedness of culture to nature. End quote. And the interrelation of natural objects with other kinds of objects is somehow implied by Timothy Morton's concept of the mesh, which he expounds in his book Ecological Thought of 2010, the mesh, an image of the interconnectedness of all living and non-living things, of a decentralized web of life, a great chain of being, and meshing the human and natural habitats in fascinating, a bit complex, organic ecosystems. And our seminar this evening engages with such ideas. In particular, it intends to propose the methodological intersection of geo and eco-criticism as a means of shedding new light on Romantic period representations of Italy, whose diversified natural environments, from the Alps to southern volcanoes, from northern plains and the Venetian lagoon to Roman marshes, is enmeshed with its complicated cultural, economic, and political contexts. And so we hope that the talks this evening will open a debate on how and why Italian environments in Romantic writings emerge as crucibles conjoining human and non-human places and spaces, thus giving rise to a palimpsestic layering of nature and culture. Right, now I am delighted to leave the floor to the speakers. Each of them will speak for about 10 minutes. After all of them, we will open the discussion and of course take your questions. And the speaker who will get the ball rolling is Serena Baiesi. So Serena, now I'd like you to switch your camera, here you are, and microphone on. Now, Serena is Associate Professor of English Literature at the University of Bologna. Her publication on British Romanticism include a monograph on Letitia Elizabeth London and metrical romance, published by Peter Lang in 2009, and many book chapters and articles on Gothic literature, Romantic theatre and drama, Jane Austen and popular culture, and slavery literature. She is the editor and co-editor of many volumes on British Romanticism, and a recent one, which I'd like to mention, is the book Romantic Dialectics, Culture, Gender and Theatre, that she edited with Stuart Curran, and it's published was published by Peter Lang in 2018. Now, Serena will give a talk entitled Lihan's Italian Green Footsteps, discussing Hans' deep involvement with the natural and urban world as it emerges in his writings inspired by his Italian sojourn. Serena.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Gioia, for this wonderful introduction. I feel a bit anxious because I'm the very first to speak. And I thank you very much to the BARS committee and also the organizer of the BARS digital events that are much interesting and followed by a lot of people, scholars, and also just the people interested in Romantic literature. So I start immediately introducing my topic. I want to introduce you Lihan because I think that everybody knows him as a key figure and a major figures during the Romantic period as editor of the Examiner, as a poet, translators, publisher, and organizer of the Cockney School, who included John Keats, Shelley, Byron, etc. And in my brief presentation today, I would like to discuss a less known aspect of Hans' aesthetic, which is well representative of how Romantic hero writers engage with the discourse of the ecosystem, assigning crucial importance to geographical specificity of the place they lived. After some remarks on Hunt's interest in the city of London and the role of natural words in it, I will focus my attention on Hunt's relation to the geopolitics and geoculture of Italy, where he lived for some years, and how he focuses his political and poetical eye to Italia's surroundings, meaning the city as well as the countryside. Hunt discloses his deep involvement and passionate relation with the external world in several poems and prose writings, especially during the 1820s, giving special attention to the natural as well as the urban milieu. It is in fact in the middle years of his career that Hunt developed what we can call a botanic eye for the environment. But unlike some of his contemporaries, like John Clare, for example, who based his poems on the privileged interrelation of human imagination and social relationship with rural background, Hunt was interested in the interconnection between the city and the natural life. His delight in London led him to formulate, using Robert Morrison's words, a kind of Wordsworthian urbanism, in which he promulgated an ecocritical view of rocks and stones and trees, and revealed the city as a place richly endowed by unnoticed beauty and the memory of past events. And actually, Hunt describes the city of London not merely as an urban place devastated by polluted by industrialization, but as a vibrant living space, which allowed fruitful intersections between human and non-human beings. Using Kate Rigby words, Hunt's geocritical literary visions reflect the natural world as a dynamic and active dimension, enabling a profitable cultural production for the advancement of human life, in which in turn keeps traces of its more than human genesis. Cherishing the conviviality of coffee houses as well as the solemnity of the churchyard, Hunt pays tribute to the urban and suburban life of the city, and particularly is attracted by the beneficial roles of the trees in enlightening human existence. In particular, he recognizes in trees a wonderful power to keep the inhabitants in a state of tranquility and happiness. Such natural elements make the city the suitable place for personal and collective improvement, and by consequent, Hunt's interest in the various aspects of the natural life inside the city has been defined as urban eco-poetic that will be reinforced once the writer radically modifies his perspective, moving from London to Italy. As a matter of fact, when Hunt traveled to Italy, a new scenario, rural and urban, became the main focus of his geopolitical and cultural attention. Hunt spent 3 years in Italy between 1822 and 1825. While there, and despite living on a limited income, Hunt produced many literary works. After a long and difficult journey, the writer and his family arrived in Genoa on the 15th of June, and he lived on the 1st of July, 1822. Immediately dazzled by the beauty of the Italian landscape and language, Italy very much seemed to meet Hunt's great expectation from the outset, and the writer instantly records a geopolitical map of the place from an ecological perspective. Tragically, as we know, just 1 week after Hunt arrived in Italy, his beloved friend Shelley drowned at the Bay of Lerici on the 8th of July, 1822. And in September of the same year, the aunts Byron and Mary Shelley left Pisa for Albaro, near Genoa, where the Hunt went on to live with Mary Shelley. 4 issues of The Liberal were published between 1822 and 1823. However, in July 1823, Byron left for Greece, Mary Shelley set off for England, and in September, the aunts relocated to Florence, where they remain, living in a primitive manner, Hunt said, until they returned to England 2 years later in September 1825. The dissolution of the circle of literary fellows and the collapse of the radical journal affected Hunt's sense of belonging in Italy, as well as the meaning of his visit. As a consequence, his poetical relationship with the Italian landscape changed too. He was still able to enjoy the natural Italian surrounding together with the culture and the literature of the place, but Hunt felt held at ease in the absence of a specific literary purpose. Once he was back to the English native country, Hunt was pleased to be home and surrounded by familiar fields. In his autobiography, declares, I quote, "Here in the neighborhood of London we are, and we may never be without our old fields," etc. However, a few lines after this cheerful note about the old fields, Hunt drawn several parallels between England and Italy. His Italian experience had forever influenced his point of view, including his perspective on domestic matters and natural surroundings. Hunt left behind several testimonies of his travels to Italy. Multiple versions of the same experience even appeared in a number of different publications. As an example of such narrative reproduction can be found in the case of the famous Letter from Abroad, which were included each of the 4 issues in the Liberal. They were entitled one letter to Pisa, one from Genoa, another called Italy, addressed to Hunt's friend Novello, and the last one to C, an unknown addressee. Some of the content of these letters can also be found in later works such as Byron and his contemporaries and Hunt's autobiography. Moreover, Hunt's literary output from this period included the essays later on collected as The Wishing Cap, written towards the end of his time in Italy, where the writer dedicates several essays to London, reflecting his state of mind at the time, namely its fervent desire to head home to England. However, in the same collection, Hunt includes an essay entitled On the Suburbs of Genoa, in which he describes Italy with a more familiar, intimate tone and from a perspective, as we said, of a spiritual eye. In the context of Hunt's writing about Italy and Italian literature and culture, Letters from Abroad constitutes one of his most famous narratives. In this work, Hunt affords his reader with his first-hand impression of both places and the people whom he visited and met in Italy in Italian soil. However, we must remember that Hunt's descriptions were strongly influenced by what he had read about Italy before he had ever set foot in that country. For Hunt, Italy had offered him an imaginative topography long before he had experienced it in reality. And I'm quoting Maria Scoina, but I think she's here in the audience, and I thank you for a contribution in the study on Leigh Hunt. As such, Hunt's essay can be read as a map that projects his bicultural sensibility, a sense that originally predicated upon that which he had read and studied, was consolidated by the personal experience in loco. In his letter, Hunt affirms his aesthetic ideal as well as enduring interest in both the social and natural environment. Hunt shows himself to be particularly attentive to interaction that take place between people and their surrounding. Bounds that are based on notion of sympathy and responsibility. Hunt reflects on the urban landscape extended to consideration of memory, culture, achievement, progress, and beauty. And for this reason, Robert Morrison regards Hunt as being one of environmentalist and acknowledged legislators. And for Hunt, the physical space of Italy and the people who inhabited it represented an attractive alternative spatiality, and that he retained for the English audience in accordance with his personal sensibility. In his letters, Hunt registers the power of spaces and places that are infused with Italian culture. Maria Scoina defines Hunt's Letters from Abroad as being a traveler that seeks to explain the murders of what she defines as an Anglo-Italianness, as a manifestation of post-Waterloo British cultural politics. And intricate association with Italy in this natural world is as such rendered problematic. Italianness is represented by Hunt as offering an attractive and alternative spatiality, identity, and literacy in the context of contention, contradiction, and suspicious. Hunt's relationship with Italian geographical and cultural spaces proved to have multiple forms of significance and effect on his literary imagination. As aforementioned, Hunt drew his description of Italian landscape in his journey across it from the existing body of travel literature. As he crosses the Alps, Hunt cannot but help articulating the nature of the poetical I, meaning the self, and I, meaning the sight, that is solicited from the benefit of his imagination. That I've got a quote that I've not time to read it, but I summarize saying that he read all the description of the Alp, and he said that he was prevented not to be able to feel the same suggestive imagination, but actually did. When he crossed the Alp, he too felt the same sublime experience that he had read much about other experience. And so Hunt's emotional responses to the Alps and the mountains and the alpine landscape, the narration of his personal experience facing the natural world, relied upon the power of his imagination of following in a way the romantic poetics and aesthetic of the sublime. In addition, in providing description of the landscape as well as personal narration in his essays, Hunt always included geopolitical and cultural comments. His relationship with Italy and Italian natural scene is reproduced in his narratives as a sometimes puzzling and conflicting, by most of all essential bond, made of mutual acknowledgement and respect, necessity and improvement between the human and non-human participants. And I want to conclude going back to Hunt's green footsteps, which are strolled by the writer on Italian and on English soil and related in his papers. As I mentioned, Hunt gave a relevant importance to the trees in his narratives, which became the essential vehicles, he said, between humanity and the heaven. And allow me to read a very short quotation. He said, "Everyone should plant a tree. It is one of the cheapest as well as easiest of all tasks. As if a man cannot reckon upon enjoying the shade much himself, it is surely worthwhile to bequeath so pleasant, useful a memorial of himself to others. They are the green footsteps of our existence, which show that we have not lived in vain. Dig a well, plant a tree, write a book, and go to heaven," says the Arabian proverb. We cannot exactly dig a well. The parish authority would not employ us. Besides, wells are not so much wanted in England as in Arabia, nor books either. Otherwise, we should be 2/3 of our road to heaven already. But trees are wanted and ought to be wished for almost everywhere. So Hunt's ecological perspective is then dislocated from England to Italy and back, reinforced with the new meaning of personal and collective growth, and endorsed by the strong link which should be cultivated and much treasured between human and non-human lives. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Serena. Thank you really for this inspiring. I think it was really an inspiring opening. And it's interesting because usually I think it's quite understandably so we associate eco-critical approaches with the natural environments, but you know, by resorting to this concept of urban poetics, I think you've shown very well that we need to put into the picture also cityscapes, urban, suburban settings. So that's very interesting. Okay, now let's move to our next speaker now. So Paulo Bouliani, oh, here you are, Paolo. Paulo Bouliani is adjunct professor of English literature at the University of Padua and Anglo-American literature at the University of Pisa, where he took his PhD a few years ago. He has recently been a visiting scholar at the Oxford Centre for Life Writing at Wolfson College. His main research areas are romantic and modernist non-fiction, in particular the personal essay as practiced by Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt, Thomas de Quincey, and Virginia Woolf. And this research resulted in 2 monographs that he published in 2019 and 2020, one on Charles Lamb and the other on the metamorphosis of the essay as a texture genre in England. And then his other main area of expertise is, on which he's extensively published, is the study of Anglo-Italian and Anglo-French cultural relations in 18th and 19th century literature, with a focus on the dissemination of Dante. I think it's important to say that this year, Dante and Montaigne also in England. Paolo is going to talk about William Hazlitt's Italian Spots of Time, focusing on his notes of a journey through France and Italy, and mainly his response to specific Italian landscapes, as Paolo, of course, now will tell us all about.
Thank you very much, Gioia, for the introduction, and also thank all of you for letting me join in this wonderful and never so relevant event. Eco-criticism and romantic studies really do seem a marriage made in heaven. And even when I first read of Romanticism and eco-criticism, I was astonished at the way this critical approach and the works of many of the most famous writers of the early 19th century seemed to perfectly dovetail, as you, Gioia, underlined at the beginning of our event, our panel. Yet, when it came to the English romantic essayists, the specific study area I've been most consistently exploring ever since my doctoral years, I had some initial hesitation for a complete embrace of such a happy marriage. When I thought, for example, of Charles Lamb's Elia, it was hard for me to fathom him as an author interested in describing a relationship with the natural environment, as he appeared almost exclusively interested in London cityscapes. William Hazlitt is a writer also traditionally associated with metropolitan writing. Yet, against this backdrop of picture galleries and lodging houses, stands one of his most interesting books, as you said, The Notes of a Journey Through France and Italy, published in 1826. Preceded and somehow prepared by a beautiful essay entitled On Going a Journey in 1822, Hazlitt's Grand Tour gave him the opportunity to write a work in which traveling appeared, according to his own philosophical views, as a way to free the individual of all his dull everyday self and attain a liberating and lively state of mind, characterized by a vitalistic, I quote, liberty, perfect liberty to think, feel, do just as one pleases. As regards the Italian section of the journey, Hazlitt follows the 18th century model of Italian travel literature, where topographic, ethnographic, and sociological remarks are interspersed with moments touching upon aesthetical issues. These moments are interesting for our reflection today, since their expression relies on an ecological, or broadly speaking, naturalistic gateway. In other words, what Hazlitt does is to yoke together moments of deep reflection with suggestion from the outer natural landscape in order to highlight his double nature of, on the one hand, disengaged, impressing, receiving wanderer, and on the other, of more seriously committed commentator of the processes of human consciousness. What I want to propose here is a parallel between Hazlitt's philosophical scaffolding of the traveling experience with William Wordsworth's famous Spots of Time framework in the Prelude, as has been suggested in a brilliant 2005 essay by Tom Paulin. What Paulin found was, although Paulin just focused on the French section of the notes of the journey, what Paulin found was a clear assonance between the nourishing and repairing power these specific moments exert on the human mind, according to Wordsworth, in some interesting passages of Hazlitt's journey. In this manner, landscape description conjoins a philosophical theoretical apparatus with the emotional description of landscape, although in Hazlitt's case the tone is kept as impersonal as possible, unlike Wordsworth's predilection for self-centered memorial investigation. What seems to me to be Hazlitt's prime concern in this description is the underpinning of the geographical space agency on human consciousness. The spots of time he selects are not effective merely on an emotional side, but they can also exert an agency on the processes of sensory decoding of the experience of travel, which is, as the prefatory remarks explicitly states, the object of traveling is to see and learn. In a recent reading of his long debated passages, Michael Wiley has underlined the spatial dimension of Wordsworth's formulation, which, though already touched upon many times, it still has to be fully appreciated. Wiley notes, for example, that the phrase spots of time was used also in an 1822 pedagogical geography syllabus by Emma Willard, entitled Ancient Geography, where she postulated the necessity to plant such spots of time as they were eminences in a road, in order for learners to gain a stable control of the study of history. Such a pedagogical method, though interesting in itself, serves here only to remark how memorial proceedings orient and reorient the consciousness of learners, which find themselves in a state of ignorance similar to that of the traveler faring through unknown lands. Such a reading perfectly fits Hazlitt's view of Wordsworth's poetical works as being a potential source of philosophical interpretation of nature, as he expressed when dubbing The Excursion as a philosophical pastoral poem in his review in the Examiner in 1814. So, to begin my Italian tour, let's catch up the Hazlitt carriage on its way between Bologna and Florence in the Apennines. Ever since the 18th century, both the Alps and the Apennines were predictable and traditional sites for experiencing moments of bliss to be hastily recorded in writing. And Hazlitt does not shy away from recording his own ecstatic feelings while on such an elevated spot. Let me quote, "The Apennines have not the vastness nor the unity of effect of the Alps, but are broken up into a number of abrupt projecting points, that crossing one another and presenting new combination as the traveler shifts in position, produce, though a less sublime and imposing, a more varied and picturesque effect." If we read this ejaculation on the backdrop of a similar moment Hazlitt registered in chapter 14, while admiring the Carthusian monastery known as the Grande Chartreuse in the Alps near Grenoble, we can easily connect such a moment with Wordsworth's treatment of the same exact place in Book 6 of the Prelude. This passage is gravid of many important critical concepts. First of all, the distinction between sublime and picturesque, which had been central to the aesthetic reflection since the last decades of the 18th century. Yet the passage also contains an indeed interesting appearance of the phrase unity of effect, which will be the hallmark of the famous Edgar Allan Poe's theory of the romantic short stories just some decades afterwards. It is easy to see that Hazlitt has a sort of aesthetic hidden agenda and aims to unfold it before his reader's eyes as he progresses his journey through Italy. The second moment is to be retraced in Tuscany, on the way from Siena to Rome, when the Hazlitts approach Lake Bolsena. The scenery around the lake is described in what could not be more precisely termed than as an ecologically minded discourse. And I quote again, "The unwholesome nature of the air from the water may be judged from the color of the tops of the houses, the moss on which is as yellow as jaundice, and the grass and cornfields on these borders are of tawny green. The road between this and Montefiascone, which you see on an eminence before you, lies through a range of gloomy defiles and is deformed by the blackened courses of huge oak trees that strew the roadside, the unsightly relics of fine old woods that were cut down and half burnt a few years ago as the haunts of bandits." In lieu of uplifting and elevating his utopy resorted to while in the presence of the mountain-like scenario of the Apennines, here Hazlitt indulges in a gritty realistic style depicting all the degrading effects, not only of the unhealthy condition of the marsh-like adjacencies, but also of the somewhat unwholesome practice of extirpating living and majestic trees in order to diminish the hiding spots for bandits. Bolsena represents a sort of pathetic counterpart to the Apennines, where Italy reminds the English traveler of the infamous decadence of the country as a whole. The last spot of time leads us to northern Italy, ideally preparing for Diego's paper. While on his way from Bologna to Venice and the same way back from Venice to Milan, Hazlitt made his acquaintance with the plain of Lombardy, which he describes in general terms as a naturalistic relief from the metropolitan scenario. Traveling for weeks in the plain, the travelers were exposed to a continuous show of ripeness, plenty, and beauty that leads Hazlitt to label the plain as, I quote, the garden of Italy or of the world. With a sort of cinematic zooming, Hazlitt is also happy to share a close frame of a particular morning near Ferrara that I would like to quote in full, and then I will end my presentation. It was a fine spring morning. The dew was on the grass and shone like diamonds in the sun. A refreshing breeze fanned the light green odorous branches of the trees, which spread a shady screen on each side of the road, which lay before us as straight as an arrow for miles. Venice was at the end of it, Padua Ferrara midway. The prospect, both to the sense and to the imagination, was exhilarating, and we enjoyed it for some hours, till we stopped to breakfast at a smart-looking detached inn at a turning of the road called, I think, the Albergo di Venezia. The effect of the plain on the senses is clear. Its agency on both the level of sensory perception and intellectual creativity is ascribable to the spatial and mnemonic double vision of Wordsworth's spots of time. I hope that it would seem sufficiently coherent, and I hope that I'll be able to expand these views and improve it with other texts from the bulk of the very copious Hazlitt works and essays. So I think I'll end here and maybe wait for someone to correct and add something else.
I know what you mean. 10 minutes is not really enough, but I know.
I tried to speak.
But well, anyway, it was enough to make your paper rich anyway, and so interesting. Thank you also for this journey through Italy, central and northern Italy. And I also appreciated your analysis in Hazlitt of the intermeshing of an emotional approach to nature with an experience which is both aesthetic and philosophic. I think it's a red thread that we can find in British Romantic figurations of Italy. So, but thank you very much. I'm sure there will be questions further on. All right, so now it's the time to invite our third speaker, Lilla Maria Crisafulli.
Hello.
Ciao, here you are. Lilla Maria Crisafulli is alma mater professor of English literature at the University of Bologna and honorary president of the Inter-University Center for the Study of Romanticism that I mentioned earlier. She's the general editor of the journal La Questione Romantica, and with Serena Baiesi, the editor of the Peter Lang series Romantic Studies, Theories and Practice. She's been president of the Italian Association for English Studies and member of the European Board of English Studies. And she's coordinated national inter-university research groups on various aspects of British Romanticism and directed European programs on women's and gender studies. Her publication includes 2 monographs on post-CBC Shelley, a great variety of edited volumes on British Romantic theatre and drama, Anglo-Italian cultural relations, British Romantic women poets, and with Kiri Ilem, she has edited an Italian edition of Mary Shelley's Valperga, and I've just known that there will be a new edition forthcoming, right, Lilla, very soon. And Lilla's paper today will be is entitled Going Green and Blue in Mary Shelley's work. She will investigate Mary Shelley's ecological sensibility, but I'm not going to say anything more because Lilla, of course, now.
Thank you, Gioia. Thank you, Gioia. Thank you, everybody, and to be here, and thank you, Bars. Okay, now, from the very beginning of her career as a writer, Mary Shelley addressed issues that today we see as deeply related to the ecosystem. to the environment and the non-human realm. In particular, it was her stay in Italy that had a persistent impact on her literary imagination, political awareness, and ecological sensibility. She resided in Italy between April 1818 and July 1823, but the influence of that experience remained indelible. She was meticulous in naming Italian places and the actors of Italian history. Moving across time and space, Mary went from the sorrowful and timeless descent to the underworld in Proserpine, to the long-lost world of medieval Italy in Valperga, beautifully edited by Nora Crook, that stages the internecine wars between Welsh and Ghibellines, with the resulting destruction of the ancient republics. Mary then shifts to the dreadful future depicted in The Last Man, in which Lionel Verney, the last man, travels from north to south in search of some reason to survive. Leaving out the great number of other stories, essays, or even the extraordinary travelogue rambles written in support of Italian independence, all these works offer a representation of Italy that entwines issues of nature and politics, human deeds and animals' needs. Following Lawrence Buell's proposal in writing for An Endangered World, according to which literary texts function as acts of environmental imagination that can affect the care and conservation of the natural universe, there is little doubt that Mary Shelley contributed to bringing about a radical reconceptualization of the environment, making clear how political systems might interfere with and damage the ecosystem. Shelley's radical reconceptualization of the environment and of the precarious relationship between human and non-human goes hand in hand with the existential journey she experienced while in Italy. Proserpine, for instance, gently and tragically embodies Mary's process of mourning for the personal losses she has suffered in the country. This process brings together a deep sense of sorrow and the need to be healed with what might be described as oceanic feeling, with reference to Julia Kristeva's essay, The Pre-Religious Need to Believe, in which she affirms that, quote, this oceanic feeling concerns the intimate union of the ego and the surrounding world, experienced as loss of self, in favor of that which surrounds us and contains us. End quote. In Proserpine, a mythological drama that evokes the story of Ceres and Proserpine, based on Ovid's Metamorphoses, Mary portrays Ceres' maternal love and her despair for Proserpine's rape and abduction. Her anger brings winter's blight, put an end to the eternal spring. Mary seems symbolically to project herself both onto Proserpine's journey to the underworld of despair and onto Ceres' sense of separation. If we now turn our attention to the other two works, the novel Valperga and The Last Man, we see how Kristeva's oceanic feeling is coupled with what Catriona Sandilands calls in The Good-Natured Feminist a politicized ethic of care. Traditionally, as David Orr states, ethics and awareness have been considered as two crucial aspects of the eco-critical consciousness, since an earth-centered approach cannot exist without attention and care towards the surrounding world. To this end, Catriona Sandilands has coined the definition of eco-feminist citizenship, according to which an ethics of care gets rid of philanthropic or gender connotation, turning into public conduct. Eco-feminist citizenship is described as an ethics of care that demands that ecological morality be guided by embodied and deeply felt experiences of caring for other beings, be they human or non-human. Mary Shelley's imagination seems in many ways to endorse this concept of eco-feminist citizenship in bringing to the forefront the relationship between the human and non-human, as well as between men's public behavior and the devastating consequences that it implies. In The Last Man, Raymond's stubborn determination to besiege Constantinople and starving its citizens causes the spread of the plague on the earth. On the other hand, Castruccio's imperial power and tyrannical decisions produces in Valperga the end of democracy. Likewise, Castruccio's patriarchal dominion inevitably meant the progressive victimization of the female. Additionally, in Mary's novels, marginalized or dispossessed people often find refuge in the depths of the forest, very much like what happened in Britain to those who became landless through the various enclosure acts, as likewise in Italy, where the woods were populated by politically persecuted people, outcast and homeless. In Valperga, the forest becomes home to the old pseudo-witch, Mandragola, to the child Beatrice, and later on to adult Beatrice, who has escaped from her torturer and rapist Tripalda. In The Last Man, the young Lionel Perdita finds hospitality in the depths of the forest, and afterwards people who hope to escape from the plague. This green world is defined over and over again as mother. In the third volume of The Last Man, entirely devoted to Italy, Verne, seeing the Apennine from above, all covered in wood, exclaims, quotes, "Man, viewing the scene, may not forget that she, the mother, dwells everywhere." And in Valperga, the still convalescent Beatrice ecstatically bathes in the great natural world. Quote, "I can lie on the grassy floor of my mother's, so long unvisited, and I can call nature my own again." Mary Shelley's blue world, concerned with the sea and water, is instead more ambivalent. In The Last Man, the flood described by the narrator exacerbates the already disastrous situation of the pandemic. The rivers, confined by men to their orderly courses, once they are left unguarded, take back their original space, adding devastation and starvation. The narrator does complain, quote, "In Italy, the rivers were unwatched by the diminished peasantry, and like wild beasts from their lair, when the hunters and dogs are afar, the Tiber, Arno, and Po rush upon and destroy the fertility of the plains," end of quote. Verne's description of the devastation of the floods sounds tragically contemporary. But it is a sea that opens the even more conflicted representations. The liquidity of the sea, seen as the blood of the Mother Earth, can save or kill humans. Dan Brayton proposes in Shakespeare's Ocean the thalassological perspective, that is, looking at the human through seawater lenses. Such a perspective appears both at the end of Valperga, when euthanasia drowns in the shipwreck of the vessel that is taking her to exile in Sicily, but also takes place in The Last Man, At the very end of the novel, Lionel's decision to depart by sea to find a new life signified hope and some kind of rebirth. But in the scene of the capture of Constantinople, the sea turns into a corrupted moral condition and physical contagion, becoming the site of human alterity. And yet, seawater becomes a maternal nurturing force at the end of The Last Man, opening up a future perspective of new encounters, while in Valperga, euthanasia's drowned body turns into the facilitation of the birth of new species. In Green Writing, Mekusic interprets the sea in Valperga in a cosmic, generative and regenerative way, in tune with Dave Brayton's blue reading of Shakespeare's plays, according to which, quote, seawater itself is cleansing, renewing, mutable, end of quote. In Mary Shelley Valperga, euthanasia moral integrity is somehow celebrated by her death by seawater that blends her soul and body with the waves and the life at the bottom of the sea. To conclude, let me touch on one last aspect of Mary Shelley's ecological sensibility. What is palpable in her work is a yearning to infringe boundaries between the human and the non-human, merging the two. Mary Shelley often employs a double movement in which either the human embraces the non-human in a total fusion, or vice versa, a growing feeling of alienation marks the relationship between the two. In The Last Man, Lionel witnesses the unrestrained freedom of the animals that dwell in the fertile Italian countryside, left empty by the epidemic. Verne experiences various encounters, two of which seem to me particularly significant. The colony of ants that Lionel sees in a cottage, and whose presence and busy life have replaced what were once daily human activities. Verne describes their coming and going in a mixture of disgust and wonder. The other episode takes place when he meets face to face the hungry gaze of a male goat, ready to protect its family at whatever cost. Verne's first instinct is to kill the animal, but then he repents, admiring instead its fatherly courage and sense of community. In The Death of Nature, Caroline Merchant writes that, quote, women and nature have an age-old association, an affiliation that has persisted throughout culture, language, and history, and common to both is an egalitarian perspective, end of quote. Mary Shelley provides us with such egalitarian perspective and designed the greatest utopia of all, the capacity to listen to and see the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilla. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that everybody enjoyed it. And especially when you refer to, well, for many, many reasons, but when you refer to the double movement, that's a very interesting concept, the double movement in Shelley's green and blue ecological sensibility, which reminds me also of, the double movement in P.B. Shelley's Mont Blanc, the nature represented as a dwelling place, but also as a source of apocalyptic destruction. So anyway, I won't go on because I want to now invite Diego Saglia to come forward.
Hello.
Hello, Diego. Diego is full professor of English literature at the University of Parma. He's my colleague in Parma. We work next door. Actually, we used to work next door, and I hope that we will go back to working next door very soon. And he's published extensively on various aspects of Romanticism. And let me just mention a few: exoticism, Orientalism, national gender identity, imaginative geographies, constructions of other places and cultures. He's authored many books and edited many books. I just want to mention a couple of his most recent achievements, and that's the book that he published with Cambridge University Press last year, in 2019, European Literatures in Britain, 1815-1832, Romantic Translations. And the second one I want to mention is the book he edited with Michael Gaiman, which came out with Bloomsbury Academic last year, entitled The Culture, History of Tragedy in the Age of Empire. Now, Diego is going to present a paper entitled Reviewing Northern Italy. Diego.
Thank you, Gioia, and thank you, everyone. It's great being here. Now it's my turn to add another piece to our jigsaw, and I warn you that I will also be reading in order to try and keep to time. Now, my starting point is that as Italian scholars of British Romanticism, we are bound to be mediators, translators, and that one of the things we have to do is to look at how we can find new ways of examining British Romantics' constructions of Italy, that old chestnut, by bringing eco and geocritical perspectives to bear on those constructions. So we need to assess, as we have been doing today, how far those constructions can be made to engage with these sets of concerns and our related reading practices. Now, to suggest one possible way forward, I will give you an idea, briefly, of the kind of work I've been doing on the figuration of the northern Italian plains, the Po Valley. Now, you may have been there. It's flat, whatever Hazlitt may have thought about the beauty of the areas he saw. The northern Italian plains are generally less studied than, say, Venice, Florence, Rome, or the south, though perhaps they are more relevant for our focus because they were represented by our authors as a literary topos, a geopolitically and geo-economically focal point, and an environment that is an assemblage of human and non-human elements. In a way, it is my my hunch is that the northern Italian plains, they do more and more complex work, more stratified, I mean, than, say, the Alps on the one side or the cities of the Grand Tour. More complex work in these geo and eco-critical terms. Now, about the northern plains as a literary topos, and here I will briefly share my screen with you. Right, I hope I'm sharing the right one. Probably not. Let me try again. Right, here we go. Now, this is the one I wanted to share with you. About the northern Italian plains as a literary topos, we need look no further back than Joseph Addison's A Letter from Italy of 1704. In Italy, he says, "Poetic fields encompass me around, and still I seem to tread on classic ground." And as for the Po Valley, as you can see, he lists flowery meadows, and the king of floods, the river Po, rolling over the plains. He concentrates on the Alps and half their moisture, which is drained by the plains, the winter snows, and then, of course, wealth and plenty. Now, the geopolitical implications of the North as classic ground resonate in Romantic period verse variously. In Felicia Hemans' England and Spain and Restoration of the Works of Art to Italy, and in Byron, especially in the conclusion to the third canto of Childe Harold. But a particularly rich locus for this imaginary of Italy's northern plains, which delineates them as an assemblage, is Percy Shelley's lines written in the Euganean Hills. Here, and let me just go up like that, scroll up like that. Here, a poetic bird's eye view ranges over the entire plain of Lombardy, as it was often called. casting it as an aggregate, an assemblage of human and non-human, climate, environment, history, politics and economics, and the mind of the mind as imagination, my spirit interpenetrated by the glory of the sky, the mind which feeds, etc. So I've extracted here a few passages and highlighted the relevant keywords. Now, the many implications of the northern Italian plains become fully and more explicitly visible in travel writings. And we have two outstanding testimonies also from the sort of Napoleonic, post-Napoleonic years. One is Joseph Forsyth's Italy, and I think we've got Keith Crook together with us today, so we've got an authority on Joseph Forsyth. And the other one is William Stuart Rose's Letters from the North of Italy of 1819, and I think I've seen Will Bowers among the participants, and so we've got someone else who knows this work much better than me. Now, in William Stuart Rose's Letters from the North of Italy, the author traces his journey across this part of the country, and in doing so lists geographical, economic, environmental and climatic features. And in the following passage, which is taken from near the beginning of volume 1, he describes the city of Mantua. What is fascinating is that he doesn't really describe the city, or at least not only. I won't go through I won't read through every single paragraph, but each of these paragraphs provides a piece of the mosaic that is this portion of the northern plains. In the first one, as you can see from the words I've put in red, he reports something like a mini tornado and its devastating effects. In the second one, instead, he concentrates on the marshy surroundings, the swamps with their mephitic vapors, and of course, the impact on the population. In the third one, he, let's say, goes back to viewing the city as classic ground, and of course, mentions Virgil with this reference to the Piazza Virgiliana, and then the statue, the bust of Virgil upon a column. He hasn't got much time for the churches, which is a real shame because they're beautiful. But anyway, he preferred to instead shift to yet another topic, the topic of climate, changes in the climate, the intensely hot heat of that summer that was hotter than any they have had in Italy for years, although he also concentrates on the sort of unpredictability of the seasons, possibly, but this has to be verified, as one of the long-term effects of the Tambora explosion. Could it have been that? But then interestingly, he also, let's say, solidifies these statements by referencing a source of information, this person in charge of the observatory at Turin, who provided him with sort of factual data on these meteorological observations. Now, my concluding remarks. Here, as we can see from this brief run-through of this sample of material, the plains, the air, the water, the human and non-human presences in the environment, I would like to say, are analogous, similar to what we have in Shelley's lines on the Euganean hills, though Rose adds extra layers of meaning that enable him to conjure up, but also unravel and interrogate this assemblage of this portion of the northern plains and the forces that composes, that act upon it. So in conclusion, this brief tentative pairing of texts suggests a possible way of refocusing Romantic Italy, of reappraising, addressing from a different angle, the Romantics' multifaceted approach and rediscovering their jointly geo and eco-attuned attention to it, together, of course, with the geocultural lens to which we have been dedicating ourselves for so long and about which we know quite a lot already. Italy is still romantic, viewed in this way, though possibly differently romantic from the ways that we have been more used to. And perhaps this kind of refocusing may also apply to other areas of the continent explored and represented by our authors. So final words, it would be interesting to see how these compare, and it would be interesting to piece together a geo and eco-critical map of Europe as imagined by the British Romantics. And here I will stop and thank you for your attention.
Oops. Sorry, I couldn't switch my camera on. Thank you very much. Perfect timing also, Diego, and you've added, I think, another very important piece to the mosaic. And I very much like your idea, this concept of a differently romantic Italy. I think we should go back to it in the questions and answers session. And now I'd like to invite Elena Spandri. Elena, yes. Elena will close the round of presentations. Now, Elena Spandri is full professor of English literature at the University of Siena. She has published extensively on Romantic poetry, Anglo-Italian relations, travel writing, also colonial and post-colonial literature. The most important, or some of her most important contributions to Romantic studies include a monograph on Wordsworth and one also on Anglo-American Orientalism in the Romantic period. With Emma Mason, she co-edited a monographic issue of the journal La Questione Romantica entitled New Perspectives on William Wordsworth, and this evening she will return to William Wordsworth. Her paper is entitled Wordsworth, Franciscan Ecology, a very fascinating title, and she will concentrate on Wordsworth memorials of a tour in Italy. Now, Elena, of course, I leave you the floor, and let me, first of all, open and share the PowerPoint. Okay. Please tell me whether you can see it. It should come up.
Yes, we can see it. I can see it. So thank you very much, Gioia. Thanks to BARS, thanks to the organizers, thanks to all friends and colleagues who have joined this beautiful event. And okay, I'll start. In 1837, Wordsworth made his third trip to Italy with his close friend, Henry Crabb Robinson, a bachelor who loved society and didn't suffer from homesickness like his elder friend. The poet was then 67 and had longed to revisit Italy for years in order to fill the gaps of his earlier visits, namely Florence, Rome, Naples, and Venice. However, when he could eventually afford the trip on his wife's insistence, he never got rid of a sense of belatedness at having achieved his destination too late for adequately benefit from it in artistic terms. Indeed, Italy was not an easy space to cross in 1837, as you can see from the map, and it was not even a unified country, politically fragmented and struggling for independence from the Austrian Empire. It offered scanty infrastructures and excessive heat. And when the two friends arrived in Rome after visiting Genoa and Pisa, eager to reach Naples, they discovered that a cholera epidemic would make it impossible to proceed further. Therefore, unable to go south, they turned towards Tuscany and the Apennine areas of central Italy, where they visited 3 important Catholic sanctuaries, Camaldoli and Laverna near Arezzo, and Vallombrosa near Florence. The journey was recorded 5 years later in Memorials of a Tour in Italy, Wordsworth's last itinerary series, which was published in the 1842 edition of poems, chiefly of early and late years. Elsewhere, I have read the series as a belated grand tour whereby the poet reenacts the self-empowering shock of recognition of his youthful Alpine imagination and simultaneously refashions present-day Italy in terms of a cultural heterotopia. Today, I would like to focus on its environmental implications by considering how Wordsworth engages with Italy's materiality so as to discover in Franciscan ethics a middle ground between 2 postures that would be equally untenable for him as far as the 1840s, that of the disengaged grand tourist on the one hand, and that of the advocate of the Risorgimento cause on the other hand. To do so, I shall briefly touch upon 2 points. The first point I've titled Nature over Art. From both the poets and Crabb Robinson's correspondence, it appears that throughout the tour, Wordsworth was more responsive to natural than artistic or architectural elements. And the poems confirm the impression that the whole trip was undertaken under the auspices of environmental sensibilities that enabled him to cope with Italy's cultural, historical, and artistic thickness. Robinson records that Wordsworth enjoyed the beauties of nature delicately, but he cared less than he wished for works of antiquity, and writes that on the top of the Colosseum, he was admiring the rich verdure beyond as much as the sublime edifice below. Nowhere is such impression stronger than in the first sonnet dedicated to Rome. In the note to the poem, Wordsworth recounts that there was a pine tree observable from Monte Mario Hill that was rescued by Sir Beaumont from destruction, and that pine trees, which had originally disappeared from many places all over the country, had gradually been restored in Rome by the hands of foreigners, who were the new owners of several Roman villas. And here is the sonnet. I saw far off the dark top of a pine, look like a cloud, a slender stem, the tie that bound it to its native earth, poised high, mid-evening news, along the horizon line, striving in please each other to outshine. But when I learned the trees was living there, saved from the sordid axe by Beaumont's care, oh, what a gush of tenderness was mine. The rescued pine tree, with its sky so bright and cloud-like beauty, rich in thoughts of home, death-parted friends, and days too swift in flight, supplanted the whole majesty of Rome, then first apparent from the Pincian height, crowned with St. Peter's everlasting dome. Now, the most immediate response to the sonnet is to read it as a gesture of cultural assimilation, whereby Wordsworth encloses the Italian spot within his own structure of feelings and family attachments and endeavors to bridge the emotional gap between Britain and Italy, his native and his host land. However, on another level, I believe that the material trace provided by the pine, rich in thoughts of home, injects into the eternal magnificence of the Roman scene an element of environmental dynamism, discontinuity, and unpredictability that resists a purely antiquarian conception of the site and obstructs the essentializing gaze of the tourist. And now I get to my second point, which I've termed deep ecology. According to Crabb Robinson, what Wordsworth most enjoyed about Italy in 1837 were the 3 sanctuaries of Vallombrosa, Camaldoli, and Laverna. I'll briefly discuss the Cuckoo at Laverna, that is the most beautiful and poetically rich among the poems centered on the monasteries. According to Franciscan historiography, Laverna was the site where St. Francis retreated for meditation in 1224 and received the stigmata. As one can see from the pictures, Gioia, can you please? Yeah, thank you. Laverna is an impressive and highly symbolic location, as it encompasses the rock, the forest, and the friary building into one single environmental unit. And in its vertical projection and shady paths, it materializes the Franciscan tenets of poverty, humility, resilience, self-transcendence, and communion with all forms of nature. On reaching the site, it seems that Wordsworth's attention was captured by a cuckoo that he had not quite heard initially, and that was pointed to him by the guide. It is therefore not surprising that the visit struck his imagination intensely, and that the cuckoo at Laverna was the only poem to be jotted down the very day the trip took place on May the 25th. The poem describes the friary as a stern Christian fortress implanted on the brink of a precipitous rock among the sterile heights of Apennine, and supplies a touch of Gothic imagery, which is a literary topos commonly associated to Italian mountainscapes, but perhaps also an embedded reflection on the austerity of monastic life. At the same time, Wordsworth rehearses the legend of the saint in purely ecological terms. He first evokes the divine affections overflowing from St. Francis' purified heart that would bring him into deep communion with all living beings. Then he connects this human-animal ecology to prelapsarian Eden blissful bowers threatened by the impending fall. The poem is permeated with the cuckoo's voice, which is heard at the beginning melting into air, yet not to be mistaken, reverberates across an unlocalized and biologically mixed mindscape, featuring oranges alongside brooms, and eventually turns into the voice of John the Baptist, the great prophet wandering in solitude. Significantly, the bird provides the narrative and symbolic link between Franciscan anti-intellectual and communal ethics and the poet's response to the space of Italy in spiritual and ecological terms, away from comforting myths of classical antiquity as much as from radical mythologies of the nation. Wordsworth, who by 1842 had turned into a convinced Story as well as a supporter of the Oxford movement, espoused the cause of Giuseppe Mazzini, who happened to land in London while he was touring Italy, and whose religious and moral integrity he heard praised by his friend Eliza Dawson. Yet, in the second part of the series, the poet straightforwardly invites Italian partisans, the Carbonari, to be patient and to strive for reform rather than revolution. And a few words of conclusion. Given this frame of reference, Wordsworth's fascination with monastic life and Franciscan deep ecology, which was occasioned by the visit as well as recollected in tranquility over 5 years, may possibly be read as a half-repressed wish to translate political into religious radicalism and to call for pan-Christian sensibilities strong enough to overcome denominational allegiance and to join two historically different countries like Britain and Italy by a common stock of ethical and, so to speak, proto-European values. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Elena. I think maybe I can interrupt the, what do you think, the PowerPoint, the sharing? Yes, okay. Well, thank you, Elena. Thank you so much. So it's very interesting, what you said about Wordsworth, this concept of cultural, you said cultural assimilation when he observes the pine tree, because I think it's another crucial issue here, the cultural assimilation. I think, in a sense, triggers a reflection on whether romantic representations of nature reflect actual places, in a sense, actual places and actual encounters, or rather landscapes, experiences that mirror their own, in a sense, projected desires. Anyway, this is one of the many issues that your 5 papers have raised. But now, what I want to do is, of course, to invite questions from the audience. I asked the 5 speakers to switch their cameras, all of them, the cameras on, and of course the microphone when they want to answer questions. I actually have here already a couple of questions that were written on the chat, and I would like to to address to all of you a question that Gary, please, would you mind appearing? Would you mind? Where are you, Gary? Gary addresses, well, it's first a reflection, something, comment that is written in the chat, and then there is a question for all of you. He wrote that at school, his mom who had to leave school after primary, had to memorize the Solitary Reaper. And it stayed with her for her life. And he wrote, she often recited to us when we were kids. It was a kind of template for many of her own poems written throughout her life, mostly in common measure, popular song lyrics, commercial jingles, and the kind of things that academics call folk poetry. And so he asks, where and how do the high literary and the low literary meet? And he says the Solitary Reaper remains a figure of for speculation in William Wordsworth's poem. And he asks, where is labor? I mean, is there labor in British Romantics Italy? This is Gary's question addressed to all of you. Quite challenging.
Yeah, Gioia, if I may, very briefly, definitely, Gary, that's an excellent point. I think that especially in, that's why I made the transition from poetry, that kind of high poetry, that gives you that kind of bird's eye view, looking at sort of, let's say, the eternal elementals like air and water and the ground and the snow melting from the Alps, to the travel writers. And some of them, like the 2 I mentioned, they are extremely careful at providing details of the people they see, especially laboring in the fields. That's why the Northern Plains, from this point of view, are a very good testing ground, because they had to go very slowly along these roads. And even as they said, oh, I will be in Verona this evening and I will see Juliet's balcony or something like that, at the same time, what they had to look at were rice paddies, fields that were being tilled. And if we don't want to go into travel writing, we've got the diaries. We've got Byron's diaries from his period in Ravenna, for instance, where he actually talks to the common people. And this sense of like a composite nature, it's the fields, it's the air, it's the people, and so on.
May I just add something, and very close to what Diego said, also Lee Hunt is treating and is describing all the people working, like the seamen or the servants, especially Byron's servants, and all the people in the countryside working in the vineyard. However, I think they are described, they represent a sort of cultural landscape. They belong to the place, and they speak such a wonderful language, as Leant is much attracted to Italian language and accents. So they are not really distinguished from the ideal and the idea of Italy. And also because I'm talking about Leant as the major example, is writing for an English audience and is including a lot of English references to his description of Italian cultural imaginary. So he's taking the Mysteries of Udolpho as a sort of counter-reading of what was happening in the Palazzo with Lord Byron and the servant mentioning, so or a scene from an Italian opera. So all the audience, the English audience could recognize, sort of idealize or visualize what was going on in Italy.
Yes. Anyone else, or are you satisfied, Gary, with the answers? Would you like to add anything? Nice to see you, Gary. I haven't seen you for such a long time.
Maybe Gioia, I could try to briefly answer his, you know, provocation, maybe, because it is not really a question. I don't know what makes the acts sordid. I don't know. There is definitely, in my opinion, a touch of Orientalism in this adjective, of course. It seems that Werther speaks out of a green sensibility that is being provoked by simply the idea that the pine tree could have been struck down by these acts. There is definitely, because the sonnet is a beautiful, and it is beautiful right because it is so complex and stratified. It is a green poem, in my opinion, but at the same time, it is a site of, it is a poem where there is a touch of orientalizing about Italy, in my opinion. So the sordid acts bespeaks a kind of primitivist as well, maybe sensibility, and something that has to do with an imaginary Italy that must be cannot change, I mean, cannot modernize as well, because we don't know the reasons why at some point in Rome pine trees disappeared. Maybe there was a project of modernization, we don't know. At the moment I don't know. Maybe somebody would respond. But,
yeah, no, I just wanted, sorry, it was switched off. It was switched off before, so I couldn't, no. Have you finished, Elena?
Yes, I'm finished.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say two things. One is hello to Gary. I'm very happy to see him. And also, I think that we also have to look at the private writing, lectures, journals, and then we may understand even more, you know, what they actually thought about the Italian labor, Italian peasants. Not as Elena was saying, sometimes you know you have this taste of orientalizing Italy, you feel it. But on the other hand, if you go to the novels such as Valperga, you do see a time when the attention goes toward the working class, the peasant especially. Yeah. So, I mean, they are there, but again, in a kind of conflicting way. No, it's not always kind of positive. Thank you.
Yes, maybe. Yes, Paolo.
If I may, yes, especially in my opinion, I was thinking about the disappearance of trees also, because here the problem, the reason why trees have disappeared is to prevent bandits, so to prevent, let's say, outlaws, people that live on the fringes of society, to hide, to have a place to hide, but also about thinking about the low and the high strata of society. I'm thinking about Hazlitt talking about the carnival in Florence, and also all these celebrations of the locals. And in my opinion, and maybe this is too a general statement about Hazlitt, but my impression is that when Hazlitt faces Italians, his approach is more similar to 18th century travel writing about Italy as not being so a welcoming and nice place. So nature, as Diego said about the plains of Lombardy, so he saw the beauty of nature in places where there wasn't people, so in places where nature was free to express itself in all its power. And whenever there's people involved, has its judgment slightly modified for the worse, maybe.
If I may.
Sorry?
If I may, Gioia?
Yes, of course, Gary. Yes, go on.
Well, I'm thinking about the sordid acts and a review of the history of the use of the word shows pretty clearly that it has historically been associated with the commonage, you know, plebeians, common life, low life. And I'm also thinking about the way in which in our cultural sphere, we can deplore the way in which ancient Roman statues were broken up and turned into lime for putting up new buildings for people who needed a place to live and shelter, and also the deforestation as an economic necessity for people who are constantly needing fuel, which is in very short supply. And so, and think of the plains of Lombardy. What an economic, what a complex and rich economic object it is. And so, I'm thinking about the opposite side of the story, you might say, or another side of the story about what landscape means to that, and what poetization or literarization does to landscape, which of course these are all verbal objects and not real ones, and they're not representations of real things. How that are we not expansive enough in our view of, because we're dependent upon the literary record and the quasi-literary record, I mean, I'd love to, if somebody wants to set up a conference comparing literary and working class accounts of the same place, I think that would be that'd be a wonderful thing. And if we could get some fiction writers to write about animals, or to write in the voice of trees, that would be something. Sorry, I'm getting a bit crazy here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So
great idea.
Thank you very much. There are another two questions actually in the chat. Claire Connolly, hello Claire. Can you switch your
hi.
Camera? Yes, hi Claire. Would you like me to read what you wrote in the chat, or you would like to ask the question yourself?
I don't mind. Shall I try asking it quickly?
Yes, of course. Yes, much better, I think.
It was in particular for Serena and Lilla to do with the question of it's I suppose a version of the human non-human question, that relationship, which is so interesting, and learned from all of the papers that we don't have writers, as it were, just taking in views, but also affording these quite intricate and complex depictions of the relationship between human and non-human worlds, but especially in relation to Mary Shelley, I suppose, but also it struck me with Hunt as well and the urban eco-poetics. It would be really interesting to think more about that in relation to the kind of complex thinking around population and the spectre of overpopulation, in the way that, for example, with Scottish Romanticism now, we think of some of the writers as almost kind of modeling debates about resource exhaustion or resource constraints that are so concerning to us now in terms of our current environmental thinking.
Serena, you want to go first and then I go?
Thank you, Claire, for such an interesting questions, and to make us thinking about what we are reading from different perspective, because we are looking for every time for different things, and we discover a lot rereading from different critical perspective. As far as Ant is concerned, I think is not giving much insight to this topic of population or overpopulation, but I would go back and think about this new perspective and maybe find out something, because he's talking about, for example, natural phenomena like the eruption of the volcano or the earthquake. And so he's thinking about this relationship between the dangers of the natural world, especially in Italy. So describing the earthquake is something that he experienced in Florence, in Pisa, and in Lerici. So it was something that was part of the dangers of living in a new place, and the earthquake was something new for his experience. So he's talking about how was the reaction to such a threatening experience by the Italians and the English, etc. So I don't have really an answer, but I've got a new point of view to think about in going back to Hans' papers and letters of memory. Thank you.
Thanks, Serena.
Thank you very much for your question. It's very intriguing, it's quite complex. Well, first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is Malthus and the essay on the population. And the essay on the principal population really arose great hunger in Godwin, in the Shelley. And, you know, there was this kind of querelle going on among them. And also Mary Shelley on her turn was certainly concerned about the question of overpopulation, especially because during the Industrial Revolution, I'm thinking about the years of the Shelleys, you know, at the time of the Shelley, the population increased quite a lot, you know, there was an extraordinary increase. Now, the problem is how that was faced. Shelley and Godwin were absolutely against any kind of selection through disease and in particular Percy and Godwin. With Mary, we have something more complicated question. There is an article written in, I think, 2020 by, I think was Jeff Black, which actually deals with this question. And he picks up Frankenstein as a sort of answer to you know, to Godwin dealing with Malthus's statement and view. So I would have a look at that if you know, I were you. And also, again, with Mary Shelley's writing, we have to see what happens within the private writing and what she says in the kind of public, you know, the narrative in her novel. And even within that, I would say that, you know, if we deal with even Frankenstein, that actually Black uses as an answer to Godwin, even Frankenstein, if you think about that, what is all the time complain about is solitude. Solitude seems not to be the issue, the central issue. In The Last Man, wow, well, seems the opposite question is there. So, you know, well, I hope I have answered a bit. Thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
I just sort of bring it all back to, let's say very briefly, the topic in hand, in the sense that probably Claire, and this is a note for all of us taking part in the panel, I think she's put her finger on what might be one of the specificities that doesn't apply to the Italian case. Because if we sort of apply your idea to what was actually written about Italy and the possibility of dealing with the topic of overpopulation, I doubt that we will find anything like in practical terms, Italy was not as densely populated as Britain. It was not as heavily industrialized as Britain. Even the northern plains, we were like decades away from seeing any kind of the beginnings of any kind of industrial development. I suppose that the hot spots where visitors, travelers would have seen lots of people would have been some of the cities, not Rome, not Milan. Naples had been the most populous city in Italy and in Europe, together with Paris, before London took over. But then again, I don't think that this would have led to reflections about environment, overpopulation, the rural and the urban. Probably this is a black spot for sort of Italy and the geo and eco-critical conundrum that we're thinking about. So thanks, Claire.
I know we're talking about Italy, not Ireland, but here I am in Cork, and it does seem to me that's one of the reasons that Ireland has to be in Frankenstein and in The Last Man, is because it triggers that problem. It screams that problem of overpopulation.
Thank you very much, Claire, for your question, and thank you for the answers. Now, we've got other three questions for the whole panel. Well, actually, one is for Diego. Sorry, Carmen. Hello, Carmen. So nice to see you here. Where are you? Let me see you.
Yeah.
Oh, here you are. Hi, Carmen.
Yeah. Hi. Hello, everyone.
Specific question for Diego. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, everyone. I think it was a great panel. I really enjoyed that. Diego, yeah, I was really intrigued by the short extract by Rose that you shared with us. And to see how much interest it is in the weather, as opposed to the buildings, the architecture of Mantua or Northern Italy. I was wondering whether is it something which characterizes writing also in relation with Southern Italy or Central Italy, or essentially what I'm asking, is it a way of making yet another differentiation between the North and the South? With this specific focus on the weather, and yeah.
This is a great question and a very challenging one. I don't know the answer. I'll make a note of it, and as I keep on reading and finding things, I'll definitely see if it could be a possibility. Certainly, what is clear about the Northern Plains is that because there are hardly any other features, and they can't concentrate on sort of forests or heights or things like that, then it's the soil, the water, and the changes in the weather, or the non-changes in the weather. So he gives so much attention to this by talking about Northern Italy, because in these plains it is so evident that everything depends on the weather. But about the center and the south, let's see. I don't want to sort of risk any generalization here. I'll make a note of that, and thanks very much.
No, thanks, Ray. I was really intrigued because I'm coming from the Northern Plains, so yeah, I was really intrigued by this his writing. So thanks everyone.
Thank you. And now two more questions for all of you. One is by Matthew Sangster. Matthew asks, to what extent, or Matthew, where are you? Again, maybe Matthew, you want to ask it yourself, or yes.
I can ask, although it really is just how, to what extent what we see in these images conditioned by the status of these people as sort of shorter or longer term visitors or tourists. I mean, I guess there's that sort of sense that people go to Italy for health. Are they seeing a greener Italy because they've been conditioned to think of it as this place? Are they missing certain kinds of greenness because they're doing the things that they can do as tourists, traveling around with a certain amount of leisure, and perhaps seeing the best of the places they're visiting by visiting sites, but also those sort of weird bits where infrastructures don't line up, or those sorts of things. So I just invite anyone who would like to reflect on what sort of tourist gaze or tourist version of green Italy we might be getting from these accounts.
Who wants to take that question? And
Well, Matthew, just not very briefly, of course, all these people were visitors, and they knew that they were visitors, and although maybe Perciabisci and Byron thought for some time that they were kind of permanently staying there. And of course, Mary Shelley had that extraordinary eye for towards Italy in more than one occasion, because just let's think about the famous essay, The English in Italy, and also Rambles, how much she seems to penetrate the political, social, and cultural reality of Italy. So how can I say, in a way, you're right. I mean, you are right that all the time there is this combination of knowing that you come from somewhere else, that you are, despite all a stranger to the country that you learn to love, as Mary will eventually. But on the other hand, there is this attempt, attempt and temptation to become one of the Italians, one of the people that you are living with, you are living among with. So it's very interesting, this question, and I think that's a lot of things can be said about Byron, about the Shelleys, about Hunt. Hunt to me, but Serena may say more. Hunt, I think, remains for a longer time a tourist rather than a kind of Anglo-Italian individual, Anglo-Italian person. Okay.
Well, I think that some of them may be seen as picturesque travelers, in the sense that, 18th century picturesque travels, they tend to look, well, I don't know, partly at least, like 18th century travelers, they tend to look at Italian natural settings also, not just as natural objects, but as aesthetic objects, I think, and a source of some kind of aesthetic experience. That's before seeing them and also when they are there. And I remember reading in Jonathan Bates' The Song of the Earth, it says that the picturesque extremized the Enlightenment tendency to see nature as something that could be commodified, something that could be also instrumentalized. So, and actually I thought about it, can we say something similar to, about our romantics in Italy, this post-Enlightenment attitude, in a sense, to approach Italian natural settings as also aesthetic objects. I mean, it's an interesting question anyway.
Can I add just one thing to what you were saying? Because as I was thinking about Matthew's question, and then you mentioned the aesthetic, my angle on this is that even when we're talking about the people who went and observed the environment from the tourist point of view, I think that whether it's explicit or not, there's always a short circuit between this aestheticizing attitude, like looking for the best bits, basically, and putting them in a frame, in a visual frame. And at the same time, this is short-circuited by the actual environment and its conditionings. Like I'm thinking, for instance, about the fact that, and I think someone has mentioned cholera today, but if you think about the fact that when you were in Rome, you always had to be very careful with the mephitic vapors, the miasma, the arrival of some kind of illness or other. And therefore, and this was all due to the environment and what was around. So basically, yes, the tourist gaze may have tried to go a certain way, but at the same time, like the impact of what the environment was, for instance, in terms of its impact on health, was very much there. So I wouldn't go just one way. I think it's more of a combination of these different, even when it came to the tourist gaze.
Okay, I know it's 5 minutes to 8 in Italy, 5 minutes to 7 in UK, and you know, also we've got different times here around the world. But I cannot but take Nora Crook's question, which I think is so interesting, and also because I want to, and I'm sure all of us want to see Nora on the screen at least. Nora, can you please here materialize in front of our eyes? It would be so nice to see you. Where? Oh, here you are. Oh, switch your microphone on.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It's lovely to see you all, really.
Nora, yes, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, well, it's very apropos of what everybody, of these last ones, which is about the expectations of travelers. And I was just wondering, they obviously, certainly the Shelleys, come with, you know, is it like in Virgil? And they match it up. And then match up what they see in agriculture against their expectations and what they've read in Virgil's Georgics. How far do you feel that is it important in terms of expectations that the tourists come to Italy thinking either it's all going to be like Virgil, and then they find it isn't? The same thing that Diego was talking about, the bumping of expectations, literary expectations against reality. Or is it, you know?
Nora, you can teach us, given, no, I just want to say that you really very clearly and very scholarly, as usually you do, you, for instance, in your edition of Valperga, you discovered, you pointed out that among the many sources that Mary Shelley used, one was certainly Virgil's source. Virgil is used a lot in Valperga, especially in the education of Castruccio at the very beginning. And no doubt that both Percy and Mary were absolutely in love with the Georgics and with Virgil. So I'm sure that you know, they were expecting to revive, to live again the experience that Virgil describes so beautifully in the Italian countryside.
While always, you know, to play the opposite game, when it comes to the authors I've dealt with and I'm dealing with to talk about, to sort of explore the north of Italy, actually what happens is that this expectation of the classic ground falls to pieces when they start looking at things not from sort of above, but actually they look on the ground, so that they start jotting down details about deforestation, the problems of all crops, you know, both negatively and positively, crops. And they talk about animal exploitation, or they talk about canals and the state of canals and the problems with floods and things like that. So frankly, from my point of view, again, it's more like yes, this idea of the classic ground is always there at the background, but at the same time, it's, you know, what Shelley calls in Euganean hills, the wealth of the north, of the plain of Lombardy. Well, this wealth has pros and cons. It's very material, it's very practical, and therefore very soon, I mean, they can keep looking either way, the classic ground or the real ground. Very often, I think there is a divergence of these.
It is not a pastoral utopia, is it? Not always. Is you know, I mean, Godwin comes to our mind here. There maybe, you know, is a vision of a purely agrarian society, self-sustaining community, but I don't think that's what they at least always found in Italy. Thank you so much. Now, this is 8 o'clock. I know that, I'm sure that there would be further questions, but I'm also sure that all the speakers are willing to take the questions after this panel. By email, to respond to your curiosity, and because of course now we need to come to a stop, unfortunately, because it's 8 o'clock, and there is actually a comment on the chat which says it is by oh gosh, I missed it now, by Suzanne Schmidt, who says I hope to be hearing more about this topic from you all. Well, now a little bit of publicity with Diego. Actually, we are organizing for next November a third appointment on eco-criticism, romantic ecology, and so forth. It won't be exclusively focused on Italy, but there may be also some parts in Italy. So, and of course, once that is organized, we will send you all the link to the webinar, because it will be, again, right, Diego? A webinar in November. So, on behalf of everybody, I really want to thank you all the participants for being here, for staying also for so long. It's been such a challenging, such an inspiring, such a rich, really, event. Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers again. And I would like actually Matthew and Anne and Amanda to switch on again their the cameras, because we want to
allow me to thank Gioia for being such a wonderful chair, and also to lead the discussions and giving a great contribution herself in the introduction and in the comments. So thank you, Gioia, and thank you, the audience and the organizers.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Matthew, Anna.
Thank you, everybody.
Colette, sorry, Colette, you mentioned your name before. Yes, Francesca, yes, of course. And thank you, and Gary.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you, so nice. Emily,
very special. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank
See you soon in the flesh.
Thank you so much.
We hope we'll see you in person soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you in Italy,
Elisabetta.
hopefully soon.
E poi c'è Fernando.
So good to see you.